standing for our opening prayer, please? Gracious Heavenly Father, we do thank you and praise you for this opportunity to come together. We honor you in all that we do and say. Father, we pray you will watch over all our men and women in the military, law enforcement, firefighters, and others that put themselves in harm's way. Father, please protect them. Father, tomorrow, 45th President will be sworn in. We pray, Father, that you will protect him and guide him towards restoring our country back to the constitutional republic it was founded on. Father, the world is in great turmoil, and we pray, Lord, that you will have your hands on all that govern. We pray, Father, that 2017 will be a new dawn for our country. In your name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First of all, you need to forgive me. I do have a cold, so this might be a little rough at times. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
It's going to be a fantastic, glorious New Year, isn't it? Great. Before we get on to our regular program, I do want to make a comment. All of us have different reasons why we think the government is out of control and not in touch. I want to mention one that happened recently, and for some of you, this is old news, but for some it isn't. I think the beat is worth repeating. Many of you heard us talk about Pennsylvania Senator Boltz. Well, he was voted out of office last November. In other words, he was fired by his constituents. Good news. Good news. Now, he was mainly voted out of office because some of his room teamed up with Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance, went to Templates District many, many times and spoke to his constituents and told them that he did not vote for school property tax in the Senate, and had he voted for it, it would have passed. So they fired him. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is he's not going to be leaving Harrisburg. Wow, I wonder why. Well, the Democrat caucus actually hired him. Not only did they hire him, they gave him a $12,000 raise. Can you imagine that? Only in government do you get fired, you get a promotion, and you get a raise. We are in the wrong field, aren't we? Let me read to you what he's going to be doing for $98,500. He will assist in the development of public policy agenda for the Democrat caucus and use this functional expertise to provide insight into policy development. Folks, can anybody tell me what the heck that means? Well, to me, it's gobbledygook. It's government run amok. Oh, and they call us deplorables. We had a request to make an announcement. I was actually giving something in written. I can't read it. But what I will tell you that Skip Reaver. Skip, where are you? Skip? Is Skip here? Okay. Are you his wife? Yes. Okay, stand up. Okay. Skip, wave your hand around so everybody knows who you are. Okay, I already told Skip I couldn't read your handwriting, okay? So I'm just going to tell everybody everybody that you have been appointed as chairman of the Berks GOP voter registration. Now, if there's anyone here that isn't registered to vote, which I doubt, please go and see Skip. If you know of anyone at any time, please contact Skip or contact us, and we'll certainly make sure they get registered to vote.
Even name changes.
Even name changes.
Or address.
Sorry, folks, I got two agendas here. Actually, Carol, you're up. Come on. Carol will actually talk to you a little bit about our Constitution class.
I too have a cold. I don't know, it's going around. My next Constitution class will be on Monday, February 13th, and we meet at Harvest Church in Fleetwood. It's a Monday night. We meet twice. We meet at 3 o'clock and at 6 o'clock, so you can attend either session if you want to come to our class. And I want to take a minute to talk a little bit. I try to do something on the Constitution each month. There's a lot of talk about Trump divesting himself of his business interests. And they even quote the Constitution. I will read you what they quote. The President shall at stated times receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument. Emolument means pay, salary, wages, whatever. The problem with that sounds like they're right, like he can't have anything else going. But they cut the sentence off. That's not the end of the sentence. The end of the sentence reads like this. He shall receive within that period, he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them meaning the individual states. So he's not supposed to get money besides his salary from the United States government or from a state government. That doesn't mean that he can't have business interests. So they're wrong about this. And they promote it, and they even read this part of the Constitution. I heard it the other day on TV, some talking head brought that point up. You know, our founding fathers wanted people to serve their country for a term or two and then return to their home, their printing press, their farm, whatever they had. How can you return to it if you have to sell it to get the job of president? So you can't sell your interests. You're supposed to return to your business. Now, it's true that probably somebody else should run it for the time being, but they are wrong when they say that he can't be making any other money besides his government pay. And if you don't know, he turned down his salary. He's not taking it. Only 2 other presidents have done that in the past. John F. Kennedy did that, and Herbert Hoover. Those are the only 3 presidents that ever turned down their salary. The first 2, Hoover and Kennedy, donated their money to charity, and Hoover donated some to charity, and what didn't go to charity he used to pay his staff. So he even spent some of his own money to pay his staff. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Up next, Judy Pelka. Judy is our events chair, and she's the one that makes all these meetings possible. So we want to thank you very much, Judy.
Good evening. Well, I'm going to begin. Our first guest speaker tonight is Mr. Roger Feig. Sure where Roger sat. I didn't get to, okay, there he is. Hi. Roger was a teacher of World, American, and Contemporary History for 35 years, teaching most of that time at Schuylkill Valley High School. Roger has been retired for almost 24 years. Tonight, Roger is presenting us some information about the reason the Founding Fathers created the Electoral College. Thank you.
Good evening. I just want to make, I'm not going to say it, someone was incorrect, but George Washington, first president, was offered $25,000 to be president, and he refused it. So there was another person as well. Our founding fathers were, I think, far superior to almost anyone in politics today. They don't always get along. A lot of you probably read a lot about it. A lot of bickering, because they didn't have CNN to report it. But they had one goal in mind: to create a good country.
Can you hear it, Mike? Can you hear it?
And they did. And they had to find it in hard, difficult ways. The first thing we had was the Articles of Confederation. And they began to realize it didn't work, because each state was its own entity. Each state could coin money, make treaties, have trade, taxes. And so they finally met in a constitutional convention, secretly. Imagine that today. They didn't even tell anybody they were going to do this, because they didn't think it would go through. And they had to decide how to create something that is not tyrannical, but too much government, that is not anarchy, but too little government. Now, I know they were selling a book back here, I don't know if they still do, called The 5,000-Year Leap. I don't know if any of you read it. If you did, if you haven't, it's great, great education. And so they came up with a system. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution gives the power of the President and all the consultation. In that, they weren't sure if they could trust the average public to make wise decisions. Didn't have any. We have to remember how many people could not read and write back in the 1700s. And so they created a system. And they had an executive branch, and they couldn't decide who. Should it be a king? You just got rid of one. Could it be a council of three, like the triumvirate of Rome? That would be too confusing. So they decided on one person. And then for how long? Some said life. You want someone for life. Others said, well, no, 8 years. That's it. And it finally came to what we have now, 4-year term, that can be reelected. Now, the next question was, how do you pick it? At first, they were discussing Congress will pick it. Won't go to the people. Second, they said, well, state legislatures should decide it. Each state having one vote. And the majority then pick the president. So all these things went around, without getting too detailed. They finally came up with this electoral college where each state would have so many electors. I'm sure most of you know how that is. It's based upon how many House of Representatives people each state has, and their 2 senators. So as of the present time, Pennsylvania has 20. California had 55. But there are 435 members in the House, and of course 2 senators for every state. There are 100 senators in the United States. So that's a total of 535. But wait a minute. There are 538 electoral votes. So at one point, I think it was 1961, they allowed the District of Columbia to have 3 electoral votes. So the votes today are 538. And so a person needs a majority of those, 270, to become president. But in the original Constitution, they had it this way. Whoever got the most electoral votes became president. Whoever got the second most electoral votes became vice president. Well, if that were true today, tomorrow, we'd be inaugurating Donald Trump as president and Hillary Clinton as vice president. Can you imagine that? I don't know how many people do that. That's what it would have been. And of course, that was in 1787. And so finally, by 1804, they realized it just ain't working. And so at that point, they had Amendment 12, which changed it basically, a lot of things involved there, but changed it basically the way we have it today. And so in today's, if you're a nominee for president, you pick your running partner, you both pick the electoral folks for your system, your party, in each state. And that's the way it goes. And they discussed too, when they talked about popular vote, people said to you today, how many people have been challenged with people that, well, it's not fair. And so popular vote, the founding fathers called it tyranny by the majority. If you go back to 1787, take Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Richmond and Virginia, those four areas had the most population. They would have potentially been picking the president every time. And so that's why electoral college came in, because they thought the presidency was so important that the whole nation should have a part in it. And that's the way it is today. Excuse me for a second. Give you an idea, there are 3,113 counties in the United States. On November 8th, Donald Trump won 2,626 counties. Hillary Clinton won 487. And most of those 487 on the West Coast and the East Coast. In 1951, a bill went in, the Amendment 22nd, limiting the president to 2 terms. Roosevelt is the only one who ever served more than 2 prior to that. And in 1967, they put in how the succession to the presidency should start. And so if a president resigns or dies or whatever, the vice president, of course, becomes president. But up until 1967, there would be no vice president until the next election. And so from that time on in 67, the vice president who becomes president appoints another vice president. And that's the way it goes today. So electoral college was to spread the ability of the whole nation to decide. And this is only the 5th time in 45 times that it went this way, with a non-popular vote, person winning. And I just thought if you want to argue, if people want to argue, I'm going to go back and read the Constitution. You've got to show how concise it is. The whole Constitution, Declaration of Independence, is in this little book. It's not how many thousand pages. Wow.
Roger, thank you so much. Just to add a little bit to what Roger said. He said there's 3,100 counties. Trump won 2,600. There's 167 counties that have the same amount of population voting power as the remaining 2,900. So just think about that. 169, whatever the number is, equals 2,900. Where do you think, if it was a popular vote, where do you think the candidates would campaign? Or more importantly, where do you think they would not campaign? They would not campaign in the 2,900. If anybody tells you Trump did not win the presidency, let me point out a few other things. First of all, Trump won 30 states. Clinton 20. Most importantly, of course, they won electoral college, but if you take all the states but California, put California aside for a moment, and you add up the 49 other states, and you add all the votes in those 49 states, Trump won the popular vote by 1.4 million. You understand that? The 49 states by 1.4 million. Now we go to California, and this is why our founding fathers were so smart. They didn't want this to happen. In California, Clinton got almost 9 million votes. Trump got about 4.5 million. So she walks out of California with 4 to 5 million lead, and that's how she got the popular vote. Again, if it's a popular vote instead of electoral college, where do you think the candidates would be? In California, New York, Florida, Texas, and possibly Pennsylvania. Rest of the states don't matter. Okay, so they were extremely true to what they were doing, and we're so grateful. Okay, folks, next I think Jerry is here. And Ron's in the back. You guys are going to be up next. The topic is reducing the Pennsylvania legislator. Jerry Knowles and Ron Boltz, if the both of you would come up and have a seat, please. Ron? Hi, Jerry. How you doing? Great. You're younger. Walk faster. Hi, Ron. Nice to see you. Folks, many say Harrisburg is too big, especially the House of Representatives. Well, you would hear from Representative Jerry Knowles and President of the Pennsylvania Alliance, Ron Boltz, who will share their views. We're going to have Jerry Knowles, Representative Jerry Knowles, come up first. First of all, I want to tell you, as most of you know here, Jerry Knowles has been a strong supporter of the Berks County Patriots. He has been here many, many times. He's also a strong supporter of school property tax elimination. Jerry, we want to thank you so much for that. I really need your support. This is the year. 2017 is the year. Okay, enough of that. I sidetracked. You're up. Whatever's welcome for you. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, folks. Each of them we're going to give about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. Okay?
Good evening, everybody. How are you? Hey, listen, we're competing against the inauguration, huh? It's a tough thing to compete against, but I certainly thank you for inviting me to be here to present House Bill 153, reducing the size of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Let me start by thanking Ron. You know, they were mentioning about my involvement with House Bill, Senate Bill 76, and this guy sitting next to me, nobody has done more for that issue. You know, sometimes I think he's in Harrisburg as much as we are. I see him down there quite regularly, and I thank Ron for his hard work on the elimination of school property taxes. Let's give Ron a round. This is one that Ron and I disagree. And let me start by saying, when you talk about abortion, it's bad. It's wrong. When you talk about taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, it's bad. It's wrong. Quite frankly, when you talk about this issue, there really is no right or wrong. It is what you believe in terms of what the size of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives should be. We are currently at 203, and the bill, when it was introduced by me last session, would have taken it originally to 153. But then the State Government Committee, Chairman Metcalf had amended the bill to take it to 151. And you ask why? Well, interestingly enough, back in the 60s, when they were doing the reapportionment and they were reducing it from 210 to 203, the target was 201. but they sat around until the early morning of the hour, or early hours of the morning, and they counted it up, and it was 203. And they said, guess what? We're tired, we're going home. So that's how you got 203 as opposed to the 201. So Chairman Metcalf felt that we would amend the bill and make it 151. So I'll tell you where it's at right now. Where it's at right now is it has gone through the House and the Senate, and then it was advertised in 2 newspapers in every county. And now we have to go through the second round. It has to be introduced now in this session of the legislature, and it's got to be passed exactly the same as it was in the last session. There can be no changes, there can be no amendments. And it needs to go through the House and then go through the Senate. And then, again, there has to be a process where it goes out into the newspaper. And then, the most important point that I can make today is the final decision will be made by the citizens of Pennsylvania. You will make the decision when you vote. There will be a referendum that will go on the ballot, and the voters will decide, do you want to have 203 or 151? Now, I'm not going to go into there's differences in terms of what Ron is going to say and what I'm saying, and I think a lot of those will be questions that I can answer. But they talk about why, and they talk about some savings. They estimate savings of $10 million to $15 million, which is a lot of money where we come from. But in terms of the overall budget, it's not a lot of money. But my reason for wanting to reduce the size of the House is simply because I think that it's easier to work together with a smaller group. Anyone that has ever been on that House floor or seen, now you've got to be there in person to appreciate it, because when you watch it on TV, it looks like everybody's just quiet and sitting there, but that is not the case. You've got 203 members, a number of staff, and there's all kinds of conversations going on all over the place. And somebody said, why 151? Well, there's not really a set number for any reason. I believe it's a reasonable number. It's not making us into another Senate. As you know, there are 50 members of the Senate. We're going to 151, and currently when you look at the ratio, it's 4-to-1. There are 4 House seats for every Senate seat, and that will go from 4 House seats to 3 House seats for every Senate seat. Now, we will be representing somewhere in the area of 84,000 people, and we currently, we're currently at somewhere in the vicinity of 62,500 people. That's the average that they use. But what I tell people all the time when they talk about the concern about representing more people, I make it clear to them that before the reapportionment, I was representing, in the seat that I hold, I was representing somewhere in the area of 70,000 people. I have Representative McKenzie he was representing somewhere in the area of 85,000 people. And I asked him, did it really make a difference? And he said that it did not. I think that with the smaller legislature, I think you're going to have better discussion. You're going to have clearer debate, and I think that there'll be more of an opportunity for each member, for each of those 151 members, his or her voice heard. So I think what I'll do at this point is I'm just kind of full, because I'm not going to just babble on and take up my 10 minutes. How close am I? 3 minutes. Now, well, let's just turn it over to Ron, and then we can give more time to questions.
Okay, Terry, thanks. Ron Boltz will be up next. I mentioned school property taxes earlier. As far as school property, I know I'm going off subject here, but I'm trying to introduce Ron. There are 4 people who are spearheading school property taxes outside of Harrisburg. We had 3 of them here last November. We had Dave Bollinger, who was the father of the movement. We had Jim Rodkey, who's sitting here tonight. There's no one that knows school property taxes better than Jim Rodkey. We also had Dean Klopp. Now, Dean is our George Patton, and Dean is here tonight as well. And the fourth of those is Ron Boltz. Ron has gone throughout Pennsylvania, door to door, soliciting votes for our behalf. He's in Harrisburg soliciting votes as well. He's out giving presentations at town halls and other areas. So we certainly want to thank Ron for all he's doing. Matter of fact, Jerry also mentioned it earlier. Now, getting back to the subject at hand, Ron has a different point of view, as you're going to find out. Ron?
Okay? No?
Can you hear me?
All right, that should be better. All right, thank you all for having me here. Thank you, Jerry, for the kind words about 76. So obviously that's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I greatly appreciate the recognition on that. I'm going to get started right away on this particular topic. Now, the topic of reducing the size of the legislature, I believe, is one of far greater importance than most people realize, and unfortunately, it's also one that many people have kind of a knee-jerk reaction to. You know, it sounds great on the surface, and it sounds excellent, but I think we really need to slow down. We need to consider the consequences of this. How is this going to change the political landscape? Will this make government more or less powerful? And what did the Founding Fathers have to say about this topic? Now, most people view this as a quote-unquote small government idea that will save money, and I'm here to tell you that it is not and it will not. What we want really, when we say we want small government, we really want to say we want a limited government. Now, of course, we want to reduce bureaucracies, and we can do with a lot less bureaucrats. But reducing our representation is not a limited government or a small government idea. Now, other people kind of view this, and they're a little pessimistic about government, so they look at this as a way to, you know, throw the bums out. You know, the fewer politicians we can have, the better. Unfortunately, all this is going to accomplish is it's going to make it more difficult to throw the quote-unquote bums out there. I'm talking about you. And it's going to actually give each individual legislators left even more power. Now, the problem is not actually the size of the legislature per se. The problem is the number of constituents per district. In this particular case, the proposal to shrink the size of the legislature by about 20%, which means there must be a corresponding increase in the number of constituents per legislative district. The end result, I believe, is going to be more representation for larger population cities like Philadelphia and less in the rural. I do not believe that the reduction will be proportional, as proponents of this legislation have said that they believe it would be. I also do believe that land mass will play a role in this. And the reason I say that is because the districts up in the northern part of the state, the northern tier, and most of the rural districts are actually pretty large geographically. They are physically large districts, while the districts in the highly populated areas are much smaller, physically sized smaller. So what I believe is going to happen is we're going to attempt to expand all of these larger rural districts by 20%. It's going to take a lot of land mass to increase the population of each district by 20%. And I believe ultimately what's going to happen is they're going to sort of consume each other. At the same time, the smaller districts down towards Philly, they don't have to expand very far geographically, add about 20% more people to their district. So what you're going to see there, I believe, is they're just going to start creeping out into the suburbs, which in turn will start creeping out more into the rural districts that they border. Now, the cities will probably lose some districts. I'm not saying the cities won't lose any districts, but I do not believe that the losses will be proportional. I believe you're going to lose more representation in the more conservative rural districts. My concern also is not so much about Republicans versus Democrat losses, but I'm more concerned with the ideology. Because of the expansion of the district sizes, even if we maintain an equal ratio of Republicans and Democrats, we're still going to end up with more of the Southeast type Republican candidates that we all know blocks a lot of the legislation that we would like to see passed. I believe we're going to end up with more candidates like that than we currently have. Now, as districts grow bigger, the candidates with the ability to appear agreeable to the more dominant constituent groups are more likely to win re-election over the candidates that we like to take more principled stands on the issues. Now, here's the biggest problem I believe with this plan. The cost of running a campaign against an incumbent is instantly going to increase by at least 20% or more. Probably even more than that, and the reason is because now lobby groups, the deep pockets, have even fewer legislators to whom they need to give money to. Two parties, they're going to benefit as well. The Republican Party and the Democrat Party, they're going to have fewer people. They're going to have fewer people to control, and they, in turn, are also going to have fewer people, fewer incumbents to give money to at election time, making it much more difficult to unseat the bad ones. Now, you have to ask yourself, why would the very legislators and, like we say, the bums that we all want to throw out, why would they vote for this? Why would they vote to reduce their own membership by 50? Is it because all of a sudden on this issue, they're all have some kind of morals compass? They just found that this is the right thing to do? I say no. They realize that this gives them much more power. There's fewer of them. It shrinks the power into a fewer group, into a smaller group, puts more power into less hands, and they understand also that it makes it much more difficult to unseat them at election time. Now, I also believe you're going to see a loss of freedom as district sizes increase, and as our voices are whittled down and homogenized. Now, luckily, you don't have to just take my opinion. We don't have to really guess at this because we have a laboratory to look at. The laboratory is the United States, the 50 states themselves. They have widely varying district sizes, and we can look at them to see if there is a correlation between freedom and constituency size and government spending and constituency size. There are many different studies. You can look at freedom indexes. There's a ton of them. I looked at 3 different ones, one by Mercatus, one by the Pacific Research Institute, and one by the Fraser Institute. In all 3, as it turns out, that the quote-unquote least free states were also the states with the smallest legislatures and the largest number of constituents per district. This is not a coincidence. Now, of course, comes the issue of saving money. Many of the proponents say, well, this is a cost savings measure. Yes, I'm a penny pincher too. I think we need to save costs everywhere we can. But I kind of find this claim to be highly disingenuous as our legislature still has not passed pension reform, still has not passed any kind of meaningful cap on education spending, has not passed prevailing wage or any kind of welfare reform, all of which individually would save us more money than this plan would. So this is not about saving money. In fact, the entire cost of the legislature is less than 1% of the budget. So doing this is only a small fraction of 1% of the budget. I think there are plenty of places, and I think you would agree, we could save a fraction of 1% of the budget, which, by the way, keeps increasing every year, regardless of what party's in control. I think also that this is actually going to cost us far more money in the future in terms of the bills that will happen and will come to fruition after we reduce the legislature. Here again, I point to a couple studies. This isn't just my opinion. I did actually research this. 2 such reports that I read are from economist Mark Thornton, who looked at not only the 50 states, but also the UK. And here's what he found. Number 1, as district sizes increase, politicians are less responsive to voters and more responsive to lobbyists. Number 2, lobbyists prefer small legislatures, which decrease their cost of lobbying and increases legislation that transfers wealth in ways that is favorable to the lobbyists. Number 3, as legislatures shrink and as district sizes increase, government tends to pass more public service spending and welfare type bills. And number 4, the study concluded as stating, quote, smaller legislatures result in larger constituencies, poorer representation, and higher level of government spending per capita. Now, as an example of this, we can look at California and New Hampshire. California, which always ranks at or near the bottom of any Freedom Index study that you're going to look at, has only 60 members of that entire state of California in their House of Representatives. Meanwhile, little old New Hampshire has 400 citizen legislators in their House of Representatives. And they are about, we in Pennsylvania are about 10 times their size and population. They have almost twice the amount of representatives in their House of Representatives that we have in Pennsylvania. And they pay theirs a $200 stipend for their service. It's a true citizen legislature that you're going to see, despite being located in the very liberal Northeast. Now, if our state legislature were really serious about cutting spending, why don't we cut the salaries of the legislature? Because we are the first or the second highest paid legislature in the country. We can make them a part-time legislature, just like they used to be, just like New Hampshire is, but instead, trying to pass off this massive big government power grab as a cost savings measure. Folks, be careful what you wish for. I know this sounds good. This bill is not a cost savings measure. It will cost you far more in future big government spending bills, and you'll see even more of your tax dollars diverted to Philadelphia than you do now. This bill, I believe, is more about incumbent protection, putting more power into fewer hands. And ask yourself this, if reducing the House by 50 members is a good idea, why not reduce it by 100? Why not get rid of it altogether? In fact, while we're at it, why don't we make things really easy, get rid of the Senate too, and let the government be the dictator? Now, I know this sounds ridiculous, and I know you folks, of course, wouldn't agree with that, but I'm just pointing this out because that's sort of the direction that this bill goes. It reduces your voice, and it reduces our ability to be heard in Harrisburg. It gives politicians and lobbyists even more power than they have now. And I will close with this. George Washington interrupted the Constitutional Convention only one time. And his concern was that the proposed number of constituents per congressman ratio at the time was too high. That proposal that George Washington opposed was 40,000 constituents per legislature. He thought that was too high, and as you heard Jerry say earlier, our House is already at 70,000, almost twice what George Washington was opposed to. So I will close with that. I would just say, Jerry, you do have a good voting record. I don't dispute that. But on this particular one, I'm sticking with George Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Folks, we're opening up for question and answers. Question? Gentleman back there. He's coming around with the mic. Stand, please, if you can. And who do you want to address the question to?
Anybody, everybody. In the federal government, the House is by population, right? The Senate is by states. Wyoming has the same representation in the Senate as California, okay? There are less than 1 million people in Wyoming, they have 2 senators. There's 45 million in California, they have 2 senators. That gives small districts, small states, less populous states, representation in the government. Pennsylvania, the House and the Senate are by population. So all the money goes to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, that's where it goes. All our highway money that comes from the federal government, the federal highway tax money that we get, goes right to Philadelphia Mass Transit, Pittsburgh Mass Transit.
Sir, we're limited on time. Could you ask a question, please?
The question is, why don't you make the Senate 1 senator for every county and do the House by population? Then Mifflin, Forest, and Monroe County has the same representative as Philly does.
Okay.
Wyoming has the same in California.
Jerry,
why not?
Well, I mean, that's certainly an idea that could be entertained. I've heard it, I've heard people speak of it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but quite honestly, I want to talk about my bill because that's what we're here to talk about. I'll be glad to talk to you about your recommendation. I think it's something that's worthy of consideration. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that you're right. I believe that what I'm doing is the right thing in terms of reducing the size of the House. And I certainly respect Ron, but it's kind of funny because some of the people that stood up and spoke against this legislation were the people of Philadelphia, because they said that they were going to lose some of their power, that they were going to lose some of their vote. The bottom line is that it's 1 person per vote, 1 person, 1 vote. Proportionately, every district is going to have relatively the same number of people. And when we talk about, okay, Ron had mentioned the part-time legislature. That's another topic. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to listen to that. But we have a full-time legislature. We have the largest full-time legislature, not legislature, the largest full-time House of Representatives in the country. We have the largest. And quite frankly, the state that I looked at in comparisons was there's about 12 million people that live in Ohio. Ohio has 99 state representatives and 33 senators. That's what the state of Ohio has.
There's a lot of things. First of all, sir, I agree 100% with your plan. I think if we would go with one senator per county, that would make a world difference. And I'll just touch on that quickly. The 25th district, Senator Scarnani's district, has 7 or 8 counties in just that one district, counties. Meanwhile, Philadelphia, just one county, has 7 or 8 senators. So if you would imagine giving Philadelphia 1 and giving that northern tier 1 per county, what that would do to the political landscape in Pennsylvania. But as far as the other things, it's the 1 vote per, that stuff doesn't really wash with me. I would go back and look at the federal government. We had 65 representatives, the original Constitutional Congress, right? 65. And I believe there was about 50 or 60,000 people per representative at the time. And over time, the House grew, all the way up until 1913. Now, you guys know other bad things happened in 1913, I'm sure, if you're a historian. One of the things that happened was the House was capped at 435. I'm talking about D.C. now. Now we have about 700,000 people per House member in D.C. And what has happened? Washington, D.C. is basically untouchable. Does anybody here feel that you can just call up Charlie Den or any of the other representatives and actually have your voice heard? Clearly not. We want our government as close to us as possible. And the way you do that is smaller districts, more representation, not less. And you're going to end up with exactly that. You're going to end up with less politicians and more representation. Going the other direction is absolutely not what the Founding Fathers had in mind. Keep in mind what George Washington said. He was upset at the proposal at 40,000 per district. We're already at 70 in Pennsylvania and looking to expand that.
Representative, I have a question for you. I ran for state rep this past year, and I actually out and visited the people I was supposed to represent. And I'm wondering if you've done that, and if you're actually wanting to increase the size of the area that you would have to visit in, and if you believe that you now represent the interests of those people. Because I really don't think that you can, even at the current rate. If anything, I would double the size of the legislature, and I would have your salary, and I would get rid of your pensions.
Well, I think it's like, that's cute, and I get it. Everybody, if we want a part-time legislature, then let's think about it, and let's go in that direction. The fact of the matter is that we have a full-time legislature that consists of 201 members, 200 House members, the largest full-time legislature in the county, in the country, and the bottom line, and I cannot say this enough. My good buddy Ron did research, had some good arguments. Let's make those arguments when we get it on the ballot, and let's let you decide.
Yeah.
This is going to be a change in the Constitution of Pennsylvania. This is a major thing, and I believe, I want to get it on the ballot so that the people, this wasn't my idea on my own. I had people come to me and say, there's too damn many of you down there, And when you talk about representing, whether you represent, like if you're representing 84,000 people now, bear in mind that when we had these districts that were set, we didn't have fax machines, we didn't have computers, we didn't have, even traveling from here to there wasn't as easy as it is. We didn't have iPhones, we didn't have iPads. Quite frankly, when I was representing over 70,000 people instead of the 62, I couldn't tell the difference. When I talked to Ryan McKenzie about representing 85,000 people, he said I had no problem doing it.
The problem is you can't represent 80,000 people. The problem is not communicating with the people, if that's what you're saying, modern technology. The problem is representing the views of very diverse people. The people here in this room have very different views from maybe some, say, liberal group that might be down the road, for example. So should we combine the two groups and say, well, you don't get only one representative for this group and that group? Because that's kind of what we're doing. So the voice of the more conservative people are going to become less and less if we increase the size of the districts in Harrisburg. So for example, we're always upset that the Philadelphia contention, down there the Southeast Republicans are always forming this block, and they're going and they're blocking bills that we like to see, and they're passing bills that we don't like to see, and they stick together and they do that to us all the time. Well, we kind of have that on the other side too. We have a conservative bloc that's doing the same thing for us. And if you increase the size of these districts, and you start to homogenize and water down those conservative voices, the only thing you're going to have left in Harrisburg to represent you is the more moderate voices, because they have a larger constituency now to represent. They don't have a small group where they can represent you well. This is absolutely a horrible idea, and I think I understand why so many people support it. You think that this is a small government bill. This is not a small government bill. This is a big government bill. Not physically sized, but powerful. This will make every legislator have more power. What is the goal of most people in the political scene? They want to move up the political ladder, right? They want to go from your local seat to a House seat to a Senate seat to the government. Why do they want to do that? Because it's a more powerful position every time you move up. You are instantly giving every remaining member of the House more power when you have fewer of them. Don't think it's a good idea, and I believe that after it's too late, you're going to realize that this wasn't really such a good idea. As far as being the biggest full-time legislature in the country, so what? So then let's just make it part-time. Let's just do what New Hampshire does. Texas, I would mention, is the only outlier to this. They have a smaller, I don't know if they have smaller numbers than us, but they do have a larger districts than us. However, the great equalizer in Texas is they pay their legislators $8,500, and they meet once every 2 years. So if we're going to incorporate that into reducing the size of the legislature, now we're talking. Now that's something I might be able to get on board with. But reducing my voice in Harrisburg, no thanks.
One final question. As a
One
resident,
final question, and if you gentlemen would limit your response to 1 minute, please. Thank you.
as a resident of Lebanon County, where Charlie Dent is my representative, I can tell you that Charlie Dent doesn't visit Lebanon County when he runs for office. He doesn't need us. He doesn't come to us. What in this bill is going to prevent that from happening? That in representation, we become irrelevant. Lebanon County is a much smaller county population-wise. What will prevent us from becoming irrelevant? And I would like to remind you that Madison, in Federalist 55, said, so small a number of representatives will be an unsafe depository of the public interest.
You say what will prevent you from being ignored by your legislature or your legislator? You will. I represent portions of Berks, Schuylkill, and a little part of Carbon County. I make sure that I get throughout the district. I make sure that I get here tonight. I make sure that I get into Hamburg. I make sure that I get into Shoemakersville. Because if I don't, they'll find somebody else. That's the bottom line. If I don't do my job, then they're going to find somebody else who they think can do my job better. And you know, I just believe that, you know, you're not talking about a congressional district here. You're not talking about I know the Senate seat is about $250,000. Congressional seat again is much. We're not talking about making a House seat into a congressional seat. We're talking about going from 62,500 you know, up until 84,000. That's what we're talking about.
There's only, in the city that I live in, there's only 30,000 people. You could write us off.
Right, and that's the problem. And it doesn't matter whether it's a congressional district or House district. The concept of representation is the same. It doesn't matter whether it's in D.C. or in Harrisburg. You still cannot adequately represent the diverse views of Pennsylvanians by going this direction. I would agree with the gentleman in the back. I would actually increase it, make it part-time, and that would give us a much, much better government. New Hampshire, again, look into that, folks. That's a good example of what I'm trying to say.
Thank you both. Obviously, we could have had more questions. Very interesting. You both gave us some food for thought. I think we might be revisiting this on both sides. And thank you both very much. Up next is Linda Brancador. She'll be introducing our main speaker for this evening. Keep it brief, Linda.
Okay. Good evening, friends. This evening's main, can everybody hear me? Yeah. This evening's main speaker is Michael Andrews. Michael Andrews is the author of the e-book, Keep More of Your Money, and owns Salrel, am I pronouncing that right? So, Information Products LLC, a company that specializes in financial education. Michael will give a presentation on the 4 kinds of money and what they mean for the United States of America and your freedom. He will also explain why we will never be truly free again until we have returned to sound money. The 4 kinds of money, a brief history of their use in the United States and what they mean for us as a nation. Michael will also explain why the return to sound money is the most important of all fights for our freedoms. I just want to tell you that after I heard Michael's presentation a few months ago, I was so impressed and motivated to be prepared in the event something disastrous would happen. So I went to the bank and drew out all our life savings money and hightailed it over to Kay Jewelers and purchased as much jewelry as I could possibly get. Michael, you said that I should have bought ingots and bars? Well, you can't wear them around your neck. Oh boy. Does anybody have a spare bedroom they could rent me for the next couple months? Because Sam's going to kill me. But listen closely to Michael. He'll tell you what to do. Michael?
That was Linda minutes. She went over.
Can everybody hear me okay? Good evening, and thank you, fellow Patriots, for having me here tonight. And special thanks to Linda and Sam and Judy Pelka for having me here tonight. And I also want to thank another guy who's trying to hide in the back of the building over there. His name is Dean Klopp, and he's the vice president of an organization that I belong to, the Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance. And Dean actually gave me the first chance I ever had to give this presentation live. So please give him a round of applause. Thank you, Dean. Now, before we get into the main presentation tonight, I need to provide some background and some context and make some important points before you can truly understand the rest. This country was founded by people who believed in, loved, and had a relationship with the God of the Bible and His Son, Jesus. His birth, life, death, and resurrection are historical truth. His tomb is currently unoccupied. This country was also founded on a covenant or an agreement with God, not just the Constitution. Most of the founders had a daily, dynamic relationship with God, and He taught them as this nation was founded. God created all people, and He loves them more than they can comprehend. His perfect will for mankind is love, harmony, and peace.